What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Thursday, June 16th, 2011. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. If you are watching us on Justin TV right now, we're not sure how long the feed is going to last. Apparently, Justin is having problems with their servers, and it's been going up and down all day. I'm told it's working right now as I wave at the camera here, but we don't know. If you should lose your Justin TV feed, of course, you can go over to renteradio.com and listen to the audio portion of the broadcast, which is really the interesting part, because I still look like this anyway, even if the TV camera isn't working, you know. All right, so moving right along, Brett's in the control room, ready to answer your callers. Oh, we've already got a call on the line here. All right, let's take one real quick. John in California. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking the call. Just quickly wanted to talk about the Fort Calhoun situation. You know, I was looking all over the Omaha World Herald website, and the only thing I saw was today there's a picture, not a mention, not an article, nothing about the fire or, you know, really anything of substance. So just wanted to point that out. This is the same Omaha World Herald that was complicit in the Franklin cover-up back then in the late 80s, early 90s, basically covering up a sex ring of, you know, child prostitutes and all sorts of, you know, just
went right into the White House, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Second thing, just to follow up on your reporting about, basically Winston Smith working over there in the National Archives, censoring and redacting the Magna Carta, you know, that has incriminating information about Jewish bankers. It's just, this is straight out of 1984. It's just pretty amazing hearing you say that the other day. I wasn't aware of that.
It caught me by surprise as well.
Yeah, you know, it's just pretty ridiculous, and it just kind of shows the power that really the Jewish Zionist, you know, lobby and influence in America. There was an article over at Veterans Today by Mike Stathis. I'm not sure if you guys linked to it, but he basically broke down all the Zionist Jews controlling the government under Obama. And I mean, this is just not an anti-Semitic thing. This is just pointing out the facts. You know, there's basically every position in the U.S. federal government, the State Department, you know, the Department of Defense, everything is basically run by Zionist Jews, behind the scenes or, you know, out in front. You know, we saw that in the Bush administration. Look what happened. We got 9/11. We got all these wars in the Middle East. So, I mean, we really do need to address this issue, and it's not something that should be, you know, discussed irrationally and saying, you know, Jews are evil and stuff like that. But it's something that we do need to, you know, discuss because this cabal really does have control.
Really, as a matter of policy, I prefer to use the phrase Israelis as opposed to simply Jewish, because I'm of Sephardic descent myself. But we know it is not ordinary Jewish people who are the problem, because ordinary Jewish people do not bear the responsibility for the crimes of the Mossad any more than Americans bear the responsibility for the crimes of the Central Intelligence Agency, any more than Muslims bear the responsibility for the crimes of Al-Qaeda, whoever they turn out to finally be when all the makeup and hair dye come out. So I agree with that. I really prefer using the phrase Israelis or dual nationals or simply pro-Israeli politicians, because that, I think, hits closer to the point, because there are a lot of people in the government who are not necessarily hereditarily Jewish or even religiously Jewish, but they have been compromised and bought, and they're definitely pro-Israel. And very often Israel hides behind them saying, well, see, this person agrees with us, but they're not Jewish, so you're just being an anti-Semite. And again, it's just the way they play the game. And I'm hoping as we go into the 2012 election season that Americans will understand that no government can serve two masters. And if your candidate is up there screaming what a great friend he is to Israel, he's basically saying he's not going to be a friend to America, because you can't be both. And it is time to basically concentrate on voting only for politicians who put America first, second, and third. And outside of Ron Paul, I'm not seeing anybody in the 2012 lineup that meets that criteria.
Right. I'm hoping Cynthia McKinney gets involved. there's a website called the Equal Party that I would advise everybody to check out. Very good information there about individuals just running basically doing write-in candidacies. Kind of far-fetched, would take a lot of organization, but it's worth a shot.
Okay, well, I offered myself as a write-in candidate in 2008, but people kept putting whiteout on those touchscreen voting machines, and it didn't work out. All right, John, we're going to let you go. I want to get into the content of the show. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. Thank you very much, and please call in again. As you heard on the news break, Representative Weiner has now resigned because of his behavior, sending pictures of himself in various states of undress to all kinds of women, one of them underage, one of them a porn star, and people are saying, oh, he shouldn't have resigned, it's just about sex. Remember when Bill Clinton was doing this whole thing with Monica Lewinsky and all those other women, they were saying, oh, it's just sex, it's not really an issue. And for private citizens, I would tend to agree. I'm not a prude by any stretch of the imagination, and when I was young, I was a wild child, and I'll cop to that whole situation. But when you are in public office and you behave like that, you're setting yourself up as a target for blackmail. This is not an issue of morality. It's an issue of national security. Foreign intelligence operations like the Mossad constantly search out sexual behaviors by U.S. politicians, or they'll honey trap them into it, document it, and then use it to blackmail the politicians to vote not for the benefit of the United States of America, not for the benefit of their constituents, but for the benefit of the foreign government whose spies have the blackmail material. And this is why it's very important. When you are aware of a public official who is engaging in this kind of behavior, you must make it public for the good of the nation, to remove the ability to blackmail this person, to remove the susceptibility to blackmail. Now, if you go back and you look at the report on Whitewater, the Whitewater scandal, which began as financial corruption in financial dealings, touched briefly on government-sanctioned drug smuggling, and then immediately leapt over to the stain on the blue dress, it's basically documented that an unnamed foreign government, but it's presumed to be Israel, succeeded in tape recording some of Bill Clinton's phone sex sessions with Monica Lewinsky. And shortly after that happened, Bill Clinton ordered the FBI to cease their search for Mega, Israel's top spy inside the federal government. Now, since that time, over 125 investigations into Israeli espionage in the United States of America have been stopped due to political pressure from above. So Weiner is not the only one engaging in this kind of behavior. Obviously, other politicians are. They have been detected by spies for foreign countries, and it is being used to warp the government away from taking care of this country and over to taking care of other countries. And so if you know of any politicians who are behaving this way, you have got to make it public. And it's not a moral condemnation, because what consenting adults do in their own private lives is nobody's business. But when you're a public official and you are susceptible to being blackmailed, you shouldn't be behaving this way. It betrays a great deal of recklessness and very poor decision-making. And so in point of fact, yeah, as a matter of fact, this kind of behavior very much impacts the ability of politicians to do their job. If they're acting like this, they're already, as far as I'm concerned, they should be disqualified and removed from public office when they get caught playing these kind of games. Now, over in Greece, yesterday we were reporting how the government was on the verge of falling, and Papandreou was basically talking about resigning. Well, he's changed his mind, started out today saying he's going to stay on and fight to deal with the debt crisis by imposing even more austerity and higher taxes on the people. In other words, he's going to stay on and serve the global bankers. Now, already some other members of his party have resigned because Papandreou just made the same big mistake that Mubarak did in Egypt. The Egyptian people were saying, get the heck out of here. Mubarak started saying, yeah, maybe I'll go. Then he comes around and says, I am going to stay here to the bitter end. And that is what really, really angered the Egyptian people. And I think it's going to have exactly the same reaction in Greece. The people of Greece want that government gone. They want Papandreou gone. They do not want any more austerity. They do not want their taxes going to the bankers. The message we are seeing from the Greek people The Icelandic people, the Egyptian people, the Spanish people, the Yemeni people, the Tunisians, the British, and hopefully soon the people of the United States of America. The message is, you borrowed that money without our permission. You can pay it back without our help. The push to create history's first global fascist dictatorship has set the stage for history's first global revolution, which means all of our guillotines have to be the exact same size around the world or something like that. I don't know what that means. But the situation here is that all of these bankers set up these paper and ink debt-based currencies, which once you are involved with them, you can never get out of debt, and they're using that debt to basically loot and pillage the countries. And the people are saying, we never agreed to this, and we are going to put it to an end. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we're talking about the situation in Greece, where the Prime Minister has already fired his cabinet. Members of his own party have basically resigned. He has failed to form a new coalition government. Basically, Greece is operating without a government, but he's up there saying, I will stay and I will make sure the bankers get their money. And I understand there's a tremendous amount of pressure on him, because if Greece falls, if Greece defaults, the effects throughout the banking system could be catastrophic, and it will be felt here in the United States of America. Because Wall Street sold credit default swaps on Greek debt to the European bondholders. I don't know what genius thought that that was a good idea. I'm sure they just looked at their commission check. Wow, look at the commissions. I'm going to go buy a new wristwatch. Went off and did it. But when Greece defaults, which seems inevitable, the people holding those credit default swaps are going to be saying, give me my money, give me my money, give me my money. And we'll be off to the races one more time here. We are already seeing 3 French banks could be dragged down by this. This could bring down the whole European Union. Nations are going to have to de-link from the European Union and from the European Central Bank simply to survive. They're going to have to say, look, we don't care how much pretty printed pieces of paper and ink you've got to wave around. This is not working. This is not working. This is making the bankers very rich and everybody else very poor. Enough is enough is enough is enough. It's a scam, it's a game, it's an attempt to enslave the world with nothing more than ink and paper. And it must come to an end. Now, over in Spain, the situation in Barcelona is starting to get very, very tense. As you're probably aware, we were reporting yesterday where it's on videotape. They're finding undercover police officers are the ones causing violence and destruction and throwing rocks through windows and stuff like this. So the media can say, oh, those protesters, they're just hooligans and they're evil and we shouldn't listen to their concerns, and, you know, just make them pay taxes and take away their public works and their pensions, because that's what we have to do to save the banks. Well, that really didn't work, and today things got ugly because the police have started shooting and beating not only the protesters, but the journalists who are covering this situation. And that, of course, as we've already seen in so many of these other situations, it's only going to make matters worse. So I would say that, you know, Greece is without a government right now, and I would almost be willing to say that by this time next week, Spain will be in the same situation. Now, over in Great Britain, there's going to be a coordinated wave of strikes on the 30th of June, end of this month. All the public employees are going to go on strike, and for exactly the same reason that they're striking everywhere else. This austerity nonsense has to come to an end. We have the bankers engaged in the biggest fraud in financial history, the fraudulent mortgage-backed security scam. And when it all fell apart, they turned around and tried to stick the public with the bill. And all of these governments that took on the toxic assets, that took on the high-risk losses, have now set themselves up to collapse unless they can force their people to cough up the money. That was the deal. I'm a government. You're my buddy, the banker. You made some bad decisions. You got caught trying to screw European investors. I will take those toxic assets off of you, and I will put them over here and just let the American people pay them off, except the American people don't want to pay them off. We don't even have the money to pay them off. Remember, you sent our jobs to other countries so the banks could take our homes. So end of this month, Britain is going to go on a massive public strike. And the message is going out there all around the world in their lust to create this global fascist dictatorship. The money junkies may have set the stage for history's first global revolution. We're all going to stand up at the same time, and we're going to go up to those compound interest money junkies with their ink and paper worthless certificates, and we're going to poke them in the eyes. Boink! Say, enough. We have to be like Andrew Jackson. You guys have made enough money on the backs of the poor people. Take your money, go retire, leave us alone. We're going to live our lives without you from here on out. And it will be a fight. I'm sorry to say it, but I put a lot of thought into this thing. There will be violence along the way. Why? Because the money junkies don't fight their own wars. They just print up some more of those paper and ink things, and they wave them in front of the professional soldiers and say, you go over there and you kill those people who don't want to live in slavery to us. And the money junkies don't care about violence and bloodshed. They will gladly kill off 20% of the population in order to make sure the remaining 80% of the population remains their debt slave. That's the way money junkies think. Oh, we got a few million people over here, and and it's all spreadsheet stuff, and it's compartmentalized. So the people who are driving the bulldozers, who are knocking over the homes, they're just saying, I'm just following orders. I'm not a bad person. I'm not evil. I'm just doing as I'm told. The authority figure said, I should do it. And the people up there in authority, they're not looking at the destruction they're causing. They're just looking at the little output on the computer that says, we don't have enough money. Go take this person's home. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's the computer told me to do it, and therefore I am innocent and blameless. The United States corporate society has become really, really good at passing the buck. I got to witness that firsthand in the last few days, but I digress. So what's going on behind all of this austerity and all of this, money junkyism going on there? Well, it's not just the money junkyism, but there is a grander plan, because we keep hearing about this thing, the New World Order, and the global government, the wonderful global society. It'll be so wonderful. But before the globalists can drop the borders, all humans must work for the same minimum low wages. All currency must be driven down to the same worthless third world level. And everybody must be made a slave to the same global private central bank. That is the reality behind the phrase, the New World Order. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about this global revolution that is on us. It started in Iceland. Then it went to Egypt, and it's in Yemen and Tunisia. It's been in Greece for a while. Riots in Ireland. Huge, huge national strike coming up in Great Britain end of this month and all over the place. And what's amazing is more and more we're seeing the American corporate media just try and pretend this is not going on. Can't let those serfs get any of those uppity ideas in their head, like, throwing off their chains and stuff like that. Don't they understand that the gods we sacrifice to say they're supposed to live their entire lives in servitude to these little ink and paper certificates that we've created? When you talk about the religion of the money junkies, these green things, these are their holy scriptures. We're not supposed to question those. This is the revealed divine wisdom that we're supposed to shape our lives around here and everything. So, yeah, I'm a money heretic. I really am, at least the way money is being run now. The original American system was the way to go, and it worked really well for the people, which is, of course, why the bankers had to get rid of it and put something else in there. But, interesting little factoid, most people are not aware of. If you total up all of the protests and riots about economics and austerity and IMF from all around the world, they number almost 100 now. Almost 100. That is a significant part of the planet is standing up to the bankers and saying, we have played your little pyramid scheme long enough. It is time for it to come crashing down. Take your fancy little $100,000 wristwatch and your Bugatti, drive into the sunset. We will leave you alone if you will leave us alone. Just take your little counterfeit printing press and get out of here. Now, you want to, and of course, you're not going to see any of this stuff on the TV networks. They're out there saying, oh, you want Mitt Romney, you don't want Ron Paul. You do not want Ron Paul. You want to vote for. And they're out there still trying to prove to themselves, or at least to the people who give them money, that they can still bamboozle the American people. And I am hoping, and certainly the fact that you're listening to my words right now is an indication that this is true, I'm hoping that Americans are evolving to a non-bamboozable life form, founded in skepticism, because remember, a skeptical people are a free people. Now, you want to talk about money junkies who are really out of touch with what's going on? Okay, Mitt Romney is doing one of his little meet greets. He's talking, trying to do a town hall meeting, and all these people around there saying, I'm out of work, I'm unemployed, and Mitt Romney says, well, I'm unemployed too. Mitt, you really ought to understand that when you're worth $200 million and you're not doing anything with your time, that's not quite the same thing as somebody, who's trying to keep a roof over his head and he's got hungry kids and he can't find a job. That's not the same thing. And he's trying to make a joke because he's after the job in the White House. And it's a horrible joke. It's his let him eat cake moment. And the media, they're out there pushing him as hard as they can. And they are absolutely dead set that you are not going to consider Ron Paul to be a viable candidate. In fact, somebody sent me this screen capture earlier today when CBS was talking about the New Hampshire debate. They misspelled Ron Paul's name. I mean, they're just trying to kill the name value. They fixed it since then, which is why I didn't link it to whatreallyhappened.com. But for a while this morning, it was misspelled. How do you misspell Ron Paul? I understand other names you might misspell. You should see some of the creative ones that I get on all these credit card applications that show up at my house. But Ron Paul, how do you mess that up? The answer is you don't. They're trying to kill the name value here. Now, speaking of killing, because that's what makes America great, over at the White House, as you know, there is this confrontation going on between the Congress, which under the Constitution decides who the nation goes to war with and not, and President Barack Obama, who's basically flinging your kids and your tax money pretty much in every direction in the world right now. So the issue now is Libya. They're making a big deal about Libya, I think probably because they don't want you to see that they're sneaking up on Syria, but we'll get to that a little later in the show. So basically, the White House has rejected this idea that they're in violation of the War Powers Act by saying, well, it's not really a war, it's war light. We're not really engaged decisively to the degree where it technically qualifies as a war. Now, that's kind of weird because I remember when those jet planes smacked into the World Trade Towers, everybody was saying, we're at war, we're at war, we're at war. Okay, so if that is the threshold for being in a war, then certainly sending all the bombs that are being dropped all over Libya, and by the way, they bagged another university today. They blew up another college in Tripoli, I think it was. If you're dropping all those bombs all over there, then it's a war, and you are a part of it. Remember the thinking in this country? They wanted to hold the gun manufacturers responsible for the crimes committed with the gun. Well, if you're sending the bombs over to Libya and they're being dropped and killing people, then you're involved with a war in that land. And they're trying to say, oh, no, it's a dynamic, kinetic, frou-frou, Fizbin, whatever they're going to call it. They're trying to change the meaning by changing the word. But if you're on the ground there in Libya and those bombs are coming down and you're watching your family blown to bloody bits and it says made in the USA on the shrapnel, that's a war. The duck test applies. If it sounds like a war and it feels like a war and it kills like a war, it is a war. And the president is weasel wording to basically deal with the fact that he is operating outside of his constitutional authority. So we're going to see what happens if Congress really has the gonadal tissue to stand up and deal with it, or if this is just more election year grandstanding, which is what it might be. Because the incumbency understands the wars are very unpopular. And so they may just sort of shadow box with the president a little bit, let him continue his war, and then during the next year's speechification season, they'll say, I tried to get the president to stop. Well, you can try, but you didn't succeed. And we're going to judge you on that. We're going to vote based on who actually gets things done. Because in 2008, America got tricked into voting for hope and change and a promise that things would be better, and we didn't get it. So from now on, don't tell us what you're going to do. We're going to decide whether to elect you or not based on what you have already done to this point. And folks, those of you on the ballots, your track record does not recommend you at all. Okay, apparently it was the Al Fatah University Campus B that got bombed today because it might be used by the enemy. Gosh darn those Libyan people. Why don't they love us? We're going to keep on bombing them until they love us again. As I mentioned, U.S. warships have been moved to the Syrian coast. We have seen the propaganda run up to sell a war in Syria. We've had two of these supposed lesbian Syrian bloggers talking about how awful the Syrian government is to gays and women, and they're cruel and mean, and they both turned out to be fakes. Just like that incubator story that suckered us all into Desert Storm. They were hoaxes. They're frauds. They're lying to sell you a war in Syria. And if they are lying to sell you a war in Syria, it means there is no real justifiable reason for us to be attacking Syria. How many more wars is it going to take to make these money junkies happy? And the answer is they don't know and we don't know. They just always want one more. What was that old slang for that snack? Bet you can't eat just one. Same thing. Bet you can't invade just one. And sure enough, we start with Afghanistan, and now how many countries are we in? All right, we're going to take a break here for commercials, and we will be right back.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. There is a new development going on. There was a meeting in Kazakhstan between representatives of Russia, China, a couple of other regional nations, and Iranian President Ahmadinejad. The American press was reporting it that Ahmadinejad is trying to create a new world order because they understand that we don't really like that phrase. We understand new world order is the old world fascist dictatorship in a brand new shiny package here. They're trying to put it on there. And Ahmadinejad is out there talking about, enslavers and colonizers, which is, it's a pretty accurate description here. But the real message isn't what Ahmadinejad was saying. It was where he was standing and who he was standing with. It is a summit between Iran, China, and Russia. And what they are saying, and I am hoping our leaders are paying very close attention to this, the message of the meeting is war with Iran will mean war with Russia and China. See, Russia and China understand the United States is in collapse. The economy's coming down, the government's coming down. Their concern, and it is a valid one, is that in its death throes, the United States of America might start throwing nuclear weapons in every direction out of pure spite. Because after all, the United States is the only nation on earth to ever use nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of other countries. And those people with the little brass keys may decide they want to go out with a bang. Look at what Hitler did to his own country when he realized he was losing. Hitler had his own soldiers blow up what little was left of the food and medicine for the people of Germany. As punishment, Hitler punished his people for letting him down. What will our government do when they finally realize we are not going to go on paying their bills and sacrificing our children for their wars? How will they react? They'll act like spoiled children because that's the way they live. So what Russia and China are trying to do, and it's rather amazing considering what we thought of the Russians and Chinese when we were young. Ooh, bad commies and all the rest of that crud we used to get in our grade school. They're the adults on planet Earth. They're trying to figure a way to allow the United States to basically go to its self-created immolation without letting it destroy the rest of the world in the process. That's what they're trying to do. And so they're basically saying the line in the sand has been drawn. The United States has been allowed to conquer enough countries, and China and Russia are realizing they've made the Neville Chamberlain mistake. That they let the modern Hitler take a few little pieces of land, and it's not enough. The conquests continue. So now they're saying, okay, war with Iran will mean war with Russia and China, and we do not want to go to war with those countries. And the reason this is scary is right now the United States government still believes a new world war will make all the other problems go away, because that worked the last couple of times. And Israel, which is still pushing right now for the U.S. to invade Iran, they'd be perfectly happy if the Russians and the Chinese and the Americans all wipe each other out, because that leaves more of the earth for Eretz Israel. They see that as a good thing. Get the dumb Christians and the dumb Muslims to kill each other off, fighting over Iran, and that solves a lot of Israel's problems. And, of course, bankers love a really good war. They don't even care which side wins, because every side goes into debt to the bankers. Now, I think a new world war is a stupid idea, all the more so because the United States cannot possibly win it with me. And I hope you will agree with me, and you will continue to join us as we oppose this lunacy of trying to fix a bankrupt economy by declaring war on everybody that the U.S. government owes money to. Little footnote here, we have this story where Obama, with all of the problems in this country, Obama has authorized a $4 billion program to refurbish the B-61 nuclear bombs. Now, the rationale is they want to make sure the bombs will go bang when they want them to, but they're technically not building new weapons or adding capability that might prompt Russia to react. Well, I'll tell you right now, when Russia sees the new hand tool leather seats and chrome going onto the B-61s, they're going to say, yeah, this is an upgrade, this is a preparation to make sure these things are going to work. And my concern here, and I think this validates that concern, we ended World War II with nuclear weapons. Because of the lack of manufacturing and the lack of war material and the lack of boots on the ground, the United States might launch World War III, starting it with nuclear weapons. And I think this is the reason why Russia and China are trying to basically build a coalition along the rest of the world, saying we have got to calm this thing down, because if we let this go into a full-blown global war, we're all going to see the rubble bouncing before it's over. Now, speaking of nuclear concerns, yesterday we were talking about this nuclear power plant in Nebraska at Fort Calhoun, which has had a level 4 incident, or a level 4 alarm warning given, which basically means imminent threat of destruction to the nuclear materials in the power station itself, from flooding in this case. There's apparently another nuclear power plant, the Cooper nuclear power station near Brownville, which has already filed a notice of unusual event. Basically, the flooding is preventing them from discharging some of their sludge into the Missouri River due to flooding. Now, I'm not sure what the sludge is all about, or they may be talking about simply, cooling effluents. I don't know if... I don't know the details, and we need to look at that. But basically, the ability to dump material into the river has been compromised because the river is so high, the back pressure is preventing the pumps from working. So we now have 2 Nebraska nuclear plants are in varying degrees of difficulty, and of course the corporate media, they're turning a blind eye to it. Over in Europe, the Fort Calhoun station is big news. They're already looking at it as a potential new Fukushima in the middle of the North American continent. So we have to keep an eye on that situation, because the water is going to continue to go up. The Army Corps of Engineers is saying, yeah, the flooding will increase. And we know what happens when the water gets into these buildings and shuts down the electrical system running those cooling pumps. That's when bad things begin to happen. Okay? Meanwhile, there's another nuclear reactor at the Limerick nuclear power plant. They've had a couple of unplanned shutdowns. They just got some of their reactors put back together. And apparently they've had a third one that shut down up there. And I'm trying to see exactly where that is located. Pennsylvania. It's up there in Pennsylvania. They're having problems with a reactor up there. And this is not reassuring. Are they all so fragile that the least little upset puts them into crisis mode? Weren't these supposed to be built with layered safety systems and redundancies and fallbacks and emergency defense within defense, layered defense, so that we would not have these kinds of problems? And now all of a sudden, it's like a little snow, a little rain, a little flooding, and everybody's having problems. They're shutting themselves down automatically now. I'm a little concerned about this thing. Now, over in Japan, over there at Fukushima, the Japanese government has decided that basically all they can do with the accumulating radioactive sludge from Fukushima is they're just going to bury it in the landfills, and they're going to put it in the middle of the landfills and put a lot of stuff over it, and they're saying this will basically limit the nearby residents' exposure to a certain level. And they're guessing because, again, the problem with all landfills, you get water percolating through there, you get leachates, and it's not like Las Vegas. What happens in the landfill doesn't stay in the landfill. And they may wrap it in jugs and steel drums and concrete, but we know that all of that stuff has a finite lifetime. And one of the big problems that they have with the current accumulation of nuclear waste materials, the steel drums are already corroding through. We have a lot of steel drums holding not necessarily radioactive material, but certainly a lot of biological weapons off the coast here of Hawaii. And they're having to go down there and start checking them out because those steel drums are beginning to corrode through. And there's some very, very nasty chemicals inside there. It's just this accumulation of all this toxic stuff from short-sighted decisions and wars. They just make all this horrible stuff and they just dump it and say, out of sight, out of mind, somebody else's problem to deal with down the road. Japan is finding more and more of these radiation hotspots that are basically saying they can't do what they need to do. They're finding more contaminated tea. The radiation apparently did not spread out uniformly from Fukushima, and as they do more detailed surveys, they're finding more and more places with very high levels of contamination. And they're seeing more and more of these farms where people are being told they cannot grow and sell their tea. Japan is issuing orders to dairy farmers in the area. They're not allowed to grass feed their cattle anymore. They're going to have to spend money, borrow money, to import uncontaminated feed to keep their cattle alive and productive. And all that grass pasture land, can't let the cows out there to eat it anymore. So it's just getting worse and worse. It's down in Iwate is where the pasture problem is taking place. Over in Koriyama City, near Fukushima. Remember the rumors we were getting on the internet and the blogs about how the children were starting to experience diarrhea and nosebleed and just a lack of energy? And Japan dismissed it as a malicious, baseless rumor mongering of the internet. Now they're acknowledging that, yes, in point of fact, children in Koriyama City are starting to show symptoms of radiation poisoning. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. Japan has now officially banned research and medical checkups on radiation-affected citizens without prior government approval. Remember what happened in the Gulf oil disaster, where the government came in and said only scientists we approve of can study and analyze what has gone wrong. They were literally arresting scientists and taking samples all along the beaches in the Gulf Coast area. Japan is now doing exactly the same thing with this radiation disaster. Unless you have their permission and their oversight, you are not allowed to do any research studies on radiation. We'll be back after the news broadcast. And aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 2 of our show today. We're going to go right back to the phones. Vince in Montana. Aloha, Vince. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. Hey, I want to give you a little report. I follow up from last week when I called you about the flooding in Montana coming down to Missouri towards those nuclear power plants. Well, one thing I did hear is that one of those nuclear power plants was just came off a maintenance cycle, and they continued to keep it down. In other words, it's not generating power. And the other
That's the one at Fort Calhoun, yeah.
Yeah, and the other one came up and is actually hot and running right now. And that'd be the Cooper. Okay.
Yes.
So what's happening up here is they're continuing to release water out of Fort Peck at increasingly high levels every day in order to keep it. What I heard is that it's a foot below going over the top, and they're having to release more and more water to keep it from going over because more and more water is coming in. The snow melt hasn't started up here yet. It's been 60 degrees, no higher than 70 all week. In some places, it's actually adding more snow. But the reports on the record snowpack that's up there is really getting ominous. I think what we got is a case where they know, because of these releases, they know what's coming down. Whether it comes off fast or whether it comes off slow, unless it glaciates up there, it's going to come off this year, and it's going to create a problem down the Missouri River. But they don't seem to trust the citizens enough to tell them the truth or the reality of the situation. And the fact that they don't shut these power plants down as a precaution, and in knowing that it's going to flood much worse than it is right now, and it's bad right now.
That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not like you can go into a nuclear power plant and just hit the breaker and say we're safe, because the spent fuel rods in the reactors and in the cooling pools, they're going to continue to generate heat because of decay processes, even with all the control rods slapped in so that actual fission is stopped completely. The decay processes of the isotopes that have accumulated in those fuel rods will continue to build. And so there must be active cooling. There must be a pump running, circulating water and boron around those rods in the cooling pool, or primary coolant liquid in the actual reactor. It has to keep going. You can't just stop using the heat there. Otherwise, it starts to melt down. And so it's not like we could shut it down, to be safe for the flood. It takes months to actually shut a reactor down because of how long those decay processes, will last with active cooling. And so, the big problem is if the floodwaters get into those reactor buildings and the electrical system supporting the cooling pumps shorts out, then we're going to start seeing runaway heat in the cooling pools for the spent fuel rods, and that is really the danger for both reactors, because the water will boil off, and then once exposed to air, the fuel rods will catch fire. And like I said, here in the United States, they're trying to say it's no big deal, calm down, it's not a problem. But over in Europe, I put a link to an article from the French media at whatreallyhappened.com. They're already seeing it as a potential new Fukushima or 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl. And as you say, the Corps of Engineers is saying, the water is going to get higher. They know it's going to get higher, and we're being told, we got sandbags and we got these gel things and we got all the rest of that stuff, and yet the photos clearly show the water is already at the doors of these reactor buildings. And
they're not giving people the big picture. I mean, all the rivers up here are running at flood stage, and it hasn't started to melt yet. I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, when the rivers are all running at flood stage, whether they're going into the Columbia or into the Missouri, the Yellowstone, they're all at flood stage, and it hasn't started to melt. So we got a potential for a really catastrophic tsunami-like flood coming out of Montana.
And again, it was all this short-sighted, we don't need to plan for the worst possible situation. We'll just plan for the average. The reason they can't let the water go any higher in the dams is because they're earthen dams, and if they're overtopped, they'll start eroding. They don't have concrete faces on them. They're not concrete dams. It's just an earthen berm. And we had one here on the island of Kauai collapse about a year ago. Once they go completely. And it's just...
there's no stopping them. There's no repairing them. I mean, they're going... It's a guaranteed thing. If that tops over, it's going to start eroding, and it's going to blow.
That's absolutely right.
I don't know what the capacity of their spillways is. They don't seem to want to tell anybody. They're testing it now. They're testing the upper limits of their spillways right now.
Yeah, they're definitely right at the upper edge there. And again, all it's going to take is just one dam anywhere in that upper river system to let go, and we will see both of those nuclear reactors get flooded.
Oh man, you'll see everything. New Orleans it'll drown New Orleans. It'll be a tsunami down the whole Mississippi Valley.
Yeah, it will.
I hope that doesn't happen.
It will. And we're losing more farmland. We're losing more farmland to flooding and industrial waste. We're already looking at this situation where we're going to have, all the corn crop that has been destroyed, which means food and fuel prices are going to go up.
Up here. I mean, they rely on wheat from the northern plains. Nobody got their wheat in up here. I mean, it's too soggy. It's just soaking wet. We got 25 inches of rain. We normally get about 15 all year. We're already at 25. So,
and it all comes back down to infrastructure and taking care and maintaining of the infrastructure, and the federal government has been neglecting it for going on 15 years because they're spending the money on Wall Street and Israel and wars, and now everybody living along that central drainage plain, they're going to pay the price for it. They're going to pay the price because the government wanted to spend our tax money on foreign governments instead of spending it on the American people and taking care of this country.
Boy,
it's just disgusting.
Well, that's it,
absolutely
Mike.
is.
I'll keep you informed.
All right. Please do.
Right.
Please do. Thanks an awful lot. Thanks an awful lot. I've been through a flood once myself when I was a kid. It was not a pleasant experience. You just have nothing to do but just watch the water edge up higher and higher and higher and take away things that you like. So, anyway. Now, down along our southern border, there's a scandal brewing. I haven't been paying much attention to it yet, but I'm going to start paying a little more attention to it now. It has to do with this scandal in which apparently a large amount of modern, high-end, very lethal firearms were being covertly sold to the drug cartels in Mexico. Now, the official story is that the ATF was going to sell these guns to these drug runners and then follow the guns to find the big players. I'm not really sure. But what we're seeing emerge in this scandal is that everybody who was trying to follow the guns were told to stand down. We're told to not stop the car, to leave them alone. And now it's a huge, huge scandal because apparently a lot of people, especially around Juarez, have been murdered with guns supplied to the drug cartels by the United States government. And everybody is saying, how could this happen? How could this be? And I think the simple explanation is that once again, agencies of the United States government have become involved in drug trafficking, as happened during Vietnam, and has happened during Iran-Contra, and is happening over in Afghanistan, the whole opium thing. And they wanted the cartels to get the guns to preserve the profitability. And I felt this was a time to possibly mention about what had been going on back in Mena, Arkansas, when Bill Clinton was governor of that state. And it centered around this little town called Mena, Arkansas, and this airfield there that appeared to be one of the key hubs for the Iran-Contra operation. And just basically very simple, guns were being smuggled down to support the Contras. And on the return flights, these CIA airplanes left over from Air America were bringing back cocaine, which was being sold to the American population, including all the way out in Los Angeles with what's his name, Freeway Ricky Ross. I actually met him once many, many years ago. And reaping huge amounts of profits that were being turned around and used partly to fund the ongoing Iran-Contra operation because Congress had not approved it. It was a violation of the Boland Act for them to be playing these games in a foreign country. And it was all going smoothly until one of the smuggling planes crashed, and a guy by the name of Eugene Hassenfuss was captured and just blabbed. Yeah, we're flying guns down here. We're flying cocaine up to the United States of America. They're selling it to buy all these bullets. And it was a huge, huge scandal. And a lot of that money wound up funding Bill Clinton's presidential campaign because George Bush Sr., who was in the White House at that time, needed to hand off the White House to another president who would keep a lid on all subsequent investigations. And there were a lot of very ugly things going on down there. The so-called train deaths. State drug investigators were being assassinated, driven out of business, driven out of state. It was a horrible, horrible time of corruption. Now all of a sudden we're seeing this whole new story about the U.S. government providing lethal weapons, machine guns, to drug cartels in Mexico. I think we're back in another one of these CIA drug smuggler operations. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, the sad reality is, and no, you will not be taught this in your state-controlled grammar school or even high school, but there is a long history of governments involving themselves in toxic substances, intoxicating substances, pharmaceuticals, drugs, alcohol, in order to profit off of what are highly profitable commodities. And it's not a coincidence that in our society so many taxes are applied to things that we find are fun, like alcohol and tobacco. Less on tobacco, obviously, these days. Well, the taxes are there, but fortunately people are getting away from smoking. But we've had cases where Great Britain at one point literally fought a war with China over Britain's right to sell opium to the Chinese people. And what's really amazing is at that time, Britain bought the opium from the United States of America. It was legal at the time. It was politely called the China trade. But you had these huge poppy plantations all over the United States of America that grew opium poppies, and some of it was sold off to make morphine for hospitals and military use, and the rest of it was shipped off to China for the opium dens. When you see the little soldiers selling those paper flowers on, Memorial Day, those are poppies. In the poem Flanders Field, where they talk about the poppies, they're talking opium poppies because the opium, represented that eternal sleep that you found in death. And so the two images are tied together. The movie The Wizard of Oz. What is it the Wicked Witch puts in the path of Dorothy to keep her from Emerald City? Poppies! Poppies! They're opium poppies. And it was a very, very common thing. People grew them and grew their own opium, and it was legal back then. And the money was used to do a lot of things, including, and a lot of people find this one by surprise, found and fund the Skull and Bones Fraternity at Yale University. Its formal name is the Russell Trust, and Russell made his fortune selling opium to China. But the government long ago discovered they can make something illegal and drive up its profitability. They learned that during Prohibition, where Prohibition took alcohol that was like 10 cents a bottle and made it worth $5 a bottle. When they repeal Prohibition, the government comes in and basically puts taxes on it to keep the price high and keep most of the money coming to themselves. Now, there's this wonderful Mel Gibson movie called Air America. And it is based, in part, yes, they took a lot of licenses with the story, but it's basically based on this CIA proprietary airline that was operating in Vietnam during the war. And overtly, they were ferrying around Congress people and doing basic commercial charter airlines. But they were also the means by which heroin, grown by a guy by the name of Kun Sa, was being brought back down and sent back to the United States, usually inside the coffins and body bags of dead Vietnamese soldiers, which is why very often when the heroin would reach the streets, it had a faint whiff of formaldehyde about it. And then when we lost in Vietnam and the collapse of that supply route for the heroin, the CIA started looking around and they started getting involved in South America with all these little covert operations, and because Congress wouldn't approve them, they started selling and smuggling drugs to fund these off-the-shelf operations. And amazingly enough, this was declared legal during the Reagan years, when William French Smith, with a very young Ken Starr as his assistant, signed legislation, executive orders, that basically said the CIA didn't have to report on any drug-running activity that was taking place in association with any of their intelligence opportunities. That was their license to smuggle. And from that, it went basically to this whole Iran-Contra operation, where they were sending guns down to Nicaragua, and they were bringing drugs back to fund it all. And the cocaine was sold, and the money was laundered and grown through this network of land flips and banks, Morgan Guarantee, Whitewater Land Development, Castle Grande Land Development, Flowerwood Land Development, Madison Guarantee, and the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. And that was the payout machine, where all the money was basically paid out as loans to businesses that never had to be repaid. And that was the way the money was distributed. And everybody who was getting all this money from the cocaine were providing some kind of support materials or services for the Iran-Contra operation. And everybody was getting insanely rich about this thing. So government involvement in covert drug activity is nothing new. It's been going on all along. And so I think what's going on down there in Juarez is that once again, the Central Intelligence Agency is involved with drug trafficking in order to fund operations that are not approved by Congress. And on the front of whatreallyhappened.com right now, I have a couple of photos. These are from a little while ago, back in the 1990s, and it is then Vice President Al Gore and then First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton posed with a known cocaine smuggler who was a big, huge donor to the Democratic campaigns. In the case of Hillary's picture, they're in front of the White House Christmas tree. I mean, you or I, who are law-abiding citizens, could probably never get into the White House at Christmas. Certainly not pose with the First Lady in front of the White House Christmas tree, although apparently Michelle Obama will let you have a picture taken with her for $10,000, but that's a completely different issue. But this guy, a known cocaine smuggler and donor to the cause, got inside the White House, next to the Christmas tree, picture with Hillary Clinton. Everybody's smiling. What a wonderful, wonderful time. So the reality is that there's a great deal of the politics of contraband inside the ruling parties of the United States of America. And more of this do as I say, don't do as I do kind of mentality that comes down from the ruling class. There's a video out there called The Clinton Chronicles. I think it was put out by a company called Jeremiah Films. I know it was available on VHS because that's what I had when I had it. That's the version I had. I don't know if it's available on DVD. I don't even know if Jeremiah Films is still in business. But it's something definitely worth looking up. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 877-342-6673. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Just looking through a couple of headlines here. The U.S. government has just announced that they plan to kill Zawahiri just like they killed Osama bin Laden, which means they're going to Photoshop him to death, I guess. Death by morphing tool. Death by airbrush. Let's see here. Other stuff going on here. As you picked up on the last couple of weeks, I'm not 100% sold on this whole Bitcoins idea. I mean, I'm very much sold on the need for a value-based currency that is operating outside of a private central bank. We need to get back to the system that worked for the American people when we fought a revolution to be free of a private central bank called the Bank of England. We definitely need that. We cannot live without that. To live under a private central bank is to be a slave. So all of a sudden we've had this whole Bitcoin phenomenon, and I have two areas of concern. One, the Bitcoins themselves, I get a distinct smell of tulip about them. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go out and use the search engine for the phrase tulip mania. My main concern, though, is the huge amount of computer power that is required to what they call mine the Bitcoins. And it's all cryptographic processing on these blocks of data that are coming in and going out. And the cryptographic processing is pretty straightforward stuff, but we don't know what is in the block. We don't know what is being solved for. And therein lies the possibility that this Bitcoin mining system is a giant cryptographic key breaker, because 90% of people are using what is called public key cryptography. And the idea is that from your private key to the public key is a one-way function, except actually, no, it isn't. If you have enough computer power, you can work your way back from the public key to the private key. And then you can engage in all kinds of identity theft by spoofing digital signatures. There's all kinds of mischief that you can do. And I do not see it as a coincidence that at the same time Bitcoin mining has come into widespread practice on the net, that we're seeing these ersatz hacker groups, Lulz Security and Anonymous, are starting to break into places like the IMF and Sony and all these other companies. I don't think the two are unrelated. But as far as the Bitcoins themselves, and I'm getting a lot of nasty people saying, Bitcoins are great. Don't you believe we need to get away from the Federal Reserve? You've got to support Bitcoins. And no, I don't. Apparently, $500,000 worth of Bitcoins has been stolen from one of the people running one of these huge mining operations. A hacker somehow gained access to the computer, the user's computer, and got the wallet file, which contains the cryptographic keys that, basically allow you to access your Bitcoin balance out there in the world. And $500,000 worth of Bitcoins just gone. I'm wondering how the hacker knew the Bitcoins were even there to begin with. It suggests to me some other part of the system was compromised. And yes, it's a new system and there are going to be problems. But again, all the promises made to get people to sign on to this system are not holding up. And I'm very concerned. If you want to play with it, that is just fine. But I don't think this is going to be anybody's path to riches, and I'm still very, very concerned about just what's going on inside those blocks that are being crunched on to mine Bitcoins. There's a lot of computer power required for these things, and I don't know what's going on inside there, and neither do you. Now, getting back to this Lulz security, they have apparently opened a request line. Hi, welcome to Lulz Security. We're doing our top 40 break-and-enter operation, and we have a request line. You can dial up our number, apparently with an Ohio area code, and you can call in and say, I want you to do a distributed denial-of-service attack on Mom's Pie Shop down the end of the street because they won't do rhubarb pies, and I hate them, therefore, blah, blah, blah. So it's basically crash a server on order. Now, folks, that is a publicity stunt. That is something to attract attention. Remember the good old days when hackers wanted to stay hidden? They wanted to stay, anonymous down there in the basement of their parents' home with their little Commodore 64 and their other little activities they had down there. Now, all of a sudden, Lulz Security Anonymous, they're media stars. They're promoting themselves. Yes, we're out there. We're supporting WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and we will crush anybody who stands in our way, blah, 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 blah. And this hack request line, that's right out of radio promotion, for crying out loud. They're trying to attract attention. They're trying to make themselves newsworthy, and they're getting headlines. They're getting a lot of headlines. And I am absolutely convinced that these two groups are probably two faces of the same operation to sort of create this need for heightened computer security for the children. Ahead of Obama's call for his new cybersecurity initiative, which is going to be one of the things that he campaigns on next year, because he certainly can't campaign on the economy and the wars, his handling of the Gulf, his handling of the infrastructure of America as the middle of the country washes out to the Gulf of Mexico. Can't run on any of that stuff. He's got to create a crisis that he can run on. And the crisis that's easiest to create is, we have got a cybersecurity crisis. These criminals are breaking into the banks, and they're breaking into this, and they're breaking into that. We must bring order out of chaos, which basically will amount to censorship and complete control of the Internet. It will start with the child porn, but it won't stay there. We have seen mission creep all along. Remember when the TSA was all about finding terrorists? And then all of a sudden we find them scanning our cell phones and our digital media players and our laptop looking for pirated music. That's what mission creep is. They'll sell you this thing you have to put up with for a very good cause. We're going to fight terrorism with the TSA. And the next thing you know, they're checking your phone for copyright violations. That's not what we agreed to when we said, yeah, you can put your hands down the front of our pants. Not that I ever agreed to that in the first place. But that's mission creep, and that's inevitably when the government sells you something for a dire necessity and it starts to mutate and it becomes something else entirely. That's what's going on here. Now, interesting little story about, we're becoming more and more aware how our cell phones and our laptops are actually being used to track us, to follow us, to keep records of where we're going and who we're talking to. And the latest little wrinkle is apparently Google is registering detected MAC addresses. A MAC address is a unique identifier on your phone. It's used for your Wi-Fi identification. And Google has been caught making this information available where you can go out and say, here is a MAC address of a device I wish to track, and it will show you on Google Map where they've seen that device. And in the article that I linked to whatreallyhappened.com, there is a direct link to a web page where you type in a MAC address, and if Google has a record of that MAC address, it will show you where that was tracked and where it was recorded being. Now, out here in Hawaii, we're lucky they're apparently not doing that anymore because my MAC addresses don't show up. But it's just one more indicator that this large cyber infrastructure, corporate structure, is using your devices to spy on you. And I'm not happy with that, and neither should you. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our show today. Phone lines are still open, 877-342-6673 if you want to get your licks in before the end of the show here today. Now, Apple has applied for a patent for a new feature. I don't think it's a feature, but they're calling it a feature for the iPhone, where if you are in a rock and roll venue, a performance venue, doesn't even have to be rock and roll, the Bolshoi Ballet, whatever, they will have a device that is flashing a special signal, which when the camera on your iPhone detects that signal, will stop it from working. And the idea here is that you are not allowed to videotape something that you just paid admission to see, because gosh darn, you may put it up on YouTube and it'll somehow bring about the collapse of the American economy. And mind you, my sympathies are with the holders of copyright. But my concern about this draconian technology in the phones, in the iPhones, is it can not only be used to prevent you from making a video of a copyrighted live performance, it can be used to prevent you from videotaping police misconduct. Because once this technology is embedded in all the cell phone camcorders out there, and it won't just stay in the iPhone, it'll eventually be everywhere, you just know every police car is going to have this little gizmo on the top, or they'll even have it on their belt to be able to disable camcorders around there, because camcorders have been the bane of police officers all the way back to Rodney King. They want to be able to go on out there and beat the crap out of journalists there in Barcelona, Spain, without having videos of it show up on YouTube. So we'll see these little devices that prevent camcorders from working at political speeches, because there are a lot of politicians out there who are very angry when things they say callously or mistakes they make wind up on YouTube. They want to be able to control that by controlling you. And so I think this is a very bad technology, and it's encouraging me to seek a new phone and a new provider, rather than allow somebody else to decide for me whether or not I will make a video. I find that highly objectionable. Good reason to go back to Diginet and get the glasses with the camera built inside of those, because I'll almost bet here that Anthony Ibarra over there at Diginet is not going to allow his pen cameras and his eyeglass cameras to respond to that hidden little signal. Now, speaking of police misbehaving, this one, oh man. Alrighty, over in Polk County, 45-year-old Robin Lee Pagoria, she is a sheriff's deputy, videotaped herself tying and handcuffing naked girls, ages 10 to 18, to an improvised, how should I put this delicately, well, basically, she took a table and she cut the legs off one end so it was on an incline, and basically abused these young girls with adult toys. I guess I can put that about as politely. Then sent the videos to a boyfriend of hers that was into some kinky stuff. This is a sheriff's deputy who was caught doing this, and apparently was doing it for quite a long time, and had the girls so terrified they would not report on her. Now, what consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home, and she was doing this in her home, she did not do it at the sheriff's office, apparently, that's fine. But when kids are involved, and when you have to tie somebody down to do what you want to do to them, that is just sick. Now, they did arrest her, as well they should have, and they've charged her with aggravated child abuse, production of child pornography, promotion of child pornography, and possession of child pornography. And in a just world, she will be going away for a very, very long time. But my question here is simply this. Is this the best the sheriffs can do? Are they not being more careful about the kind of people they are recruiting and giving badges and guns to? Somebody really messed up letting this sicko into the sheriff's office. I don't know, maybe she got kicked out of the nunnery or something. But when children are involved, I get a very strong emotional reaction that people who do this kind of thing to children ought to be dealt with very directly and violently, not out of revenge, but out of a deterrent. Maybe whatever drugs they're putting in the water to keep us all tranquilized so we don't rise up against the bankers have side effects, because we seem to be seeing a lot of this very bizarre behavior from law enforcement. We've got this girl tying 10-year-old girls to the table and whipping them on camcorder. We had that guy we reported on yesterday who offered to let a woman off of a traffic ticket if she would fondle him, you know, in front of her, the other passengers in the car. So this is getting a little bit bizarre out there. Maybe it's that blue dye. That blue dye they put in the uniforms and the blue shirts. Maybe it affects the brain of people who wear those uniforms. If you've got a better theory, go ahead and mail it in here, because this is just sick. This is just sick. And I got to tell you, I don't think you should let anybody with a badge and a gun and a blue uniform anywhere near your kids after this one. This is just sick. Now, interesting little story. We were talking about how this push to vaccinate everybody and this push to sell us all medicines that we don't really need, and the declining quality of health care in this country. And we were making note of that the other day when the infant mortality rate in those cities most affected by the Fukushima fallout took a major upward leap, something like 35%, and the rest of the country only 2%. Which in and of itself is basically telling you that American medical care may be the most expensive in the world, but it's very, very, very poor quality. And now the proof is apparently that the CDC's National Center for Health Statistics is saying that your lifespan is in decline. In hundreds and hundreds of U.S. counties, your lifespan is now shorter. Maybe this is how the government is going to get off the hook for having already spent all the Social Security money back during the Clinton years. The medical industry is basically going to say, when you're no longer able to work, well, that's it. You don't get to live any longer than that. Because lifespans are on the decline in the United States in hundreds and hundreds of counties. So we can't even say this is a good place to live any longer. Life expectancy is dropping in the United States of America. Now, the other night, I was watching the Science Channel, because I'm sick of watching Bourne Identity reruns on everything else here. And they ran a couple of shows side by side that caught my attention. And one was Science Channel itself, What Came Before the Big Bang. And then on another associated channel was this series that Morgan Freeman is doing called Through the Wormhole, which sort of tries to portray itself as a science series, but to me seems overtly oriented toward religious philosophy. And the show he was talking about was how, is the universe finite or infinite? And of course, the Big Bangers think it's finite because somewhere there's an outer edge to the bang. And then Morgan Freeman is going on to talk about what lies beyond that edge of the universe. And I think what is starting to happen when they talk about what comes before the Big Bang and what lies outside the bounds of our universe is they're finally coming to accept that the evidence is overwhelmingly against this Big Bang theory, which is really just religion wrapped in a scientific veneer. This theory should have been gotten rid of when general relativity came along and said the Big Bang couldn't happen, because it would have been the biggest black hole of all and not able to escape its own gravity field. And then they came up with all of this, but at the moment it happened, there was magic, and therefore we can get around this, and this whole Higgs boson, which they're still trying to find up there in Switzerland with the Large Hadron Collider. And I think they're beginning to understand that the science is not supporting this theory, but they don't want to just say, we were wrong, cancel our tenure, Send back all the books for a refund, and they're going to try and sort of slowly evolve where the Big Bang is not the creation of the entire universe, but something a little more local and regional, which may not be far from the truth. Because the cosmic background radiation that has been promoted as proving the Big Bang, to me, looks like a very thin, diaphanous remains of a planetary nebula seen from a very unique location, like really close to its center. And I'll go into that in some detail in another show. But we're beginning to see in the popularization of science that they're beginning to back away from the absolutist view of the Big Bang as creation of the entire universe, and there was nothing before it and nothing outside of it. And now they're starting to say, well, yeah, there was something else going on. And if you look at how long it took for the science establishment, still being goaded by religion, to finally accept the sun as the center of the solar system. After all those years of, you will agree with Aristotle or we will torture you. And Copernicus correctly deduced that the sun was the center of the solar system. And Galileo proved it with the telescope. And still, all of those people who were making their living on epicycles and deference wouldn't change, and literally had to go through an entire generation of scientists passing away before the young scientists would grow up and say, I don't know why they were believing this nonsense. I guess it got them tenure in a university position, but really, they were kind of full of it. And I think we're starting to see that transition when we see shows like this that sort of grudgingly acknowledge that there are some problems with the Big Bang Theory, and that maybe, the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of all that is, and maybe there is something outside, what we think of as the limits of the Big Bang explosion. So I wanted to basically point that out because longtime readers understand that I absolutely think the theory of the Big Bang is total nonsense, and that it is religion disguised as science, and that the Large Hadron Collider is just the latest in a long series of buildings and constructions going back to Stonehenge and the pyramids to try to talk to God, and it's doomed to fail. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Rense Radio Network with more news and more stuff and more calls, and until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, and aloha, America.